would like to. No worries. Well, I would like, of course, first of all, to volunteer, of course, and people, of course, following this through Zoom. Of course, to express my deep gratitude, not just for today, for the Institute of Advanced Studies, but also to Research Center, LT2D, and of course, I must mention also that what allows me to be here is a fellowship from Fondation Maison. It's really a great pleasure, and thank you so much for having me, not just today, but all this month, and you've been really supportive for this day, and it's really, from my, even if brief until now, contacts with the Institute is really, I invite actually more people to come here. I know that I think you are still receiving applications for next year, so people watching us online, please do apply. I think it's really an interdisciplinary environment for this. So for today, I would like to share. So knowing that I think did not only this room but also people at home or at the office following us through video conference are likely to come from a very broad range of disciplines. So I try to prepare something that try to cover a little bit territory from different academic perspectives, and some things I think will be more exciting, I hope, for cultural studies or critical studies or media studies, but it's kind of an overall range towards an inter or even transdisciplinary approach to artificial intelligence and its emergence on the field of domain of social sciences and humanities. So I just would like to briefly share the structure of this lecture. So I always think it's important to start by clear and simple definitions. In this case, about artificial intelligence, since the term is really, really wide nowadays, and also touching some prefigurations, what I call prefigurations. Humanities here. So just to give us a little bit kind of context and overall from this humanities and from the creative also perspective. Then we'll move a little bit on the notion of sociotechnical imaginaries and its connection with the so-called fourth industrial revolution. And then in the third part, we'll enter what I call the rarefaction of the object of study. And we were kind of about to speak a little bit on how did the field, until now, did the field of media and communication studies as an example for the broader domain of social sciences has been embracing what I call the social study of AI. Then kind of trying to open a little bit the debate, some perspectives on what I suggest is the need to renew not only the research agendas, but also for us that also teach the teaching agendas and the curricular parts of our work as scholars. So as I was saying, it's really important to try to define a little bit and contextualize the term or the concept of artificial intelligence, because today it serves, and I would say mostly from the last 3 years with the rising of several commercial applications from well-known technology companies, mostly but not only from the US. So the term kind of is being used as a very broad umbrella, so it's really important to address it in a proper way. So I will start maybe with an European perspective, but just to say that even this high-level expert group from the European Union felt the need to state that it's using a very crude oversimplification, which already gives us the notion of how expansive and wide open is the field itself, and also to give us, try to situate the notion of artificial intelligence within the fields, in this case, of machine learning, robotics, and reasoning. And of course, within machine learning, we can see several methodologies or schools, such as deep learning and reinforcement learning, etc. So this is just a little bit to help us. Sometimes nowadays, for instance, generative AI is sometimes used as a synonymous of machine learning. It's really sometimes called also AI. So just to give you a little bit of the different flavors and approaches and schools and even paths of thought that for 7 decades actually coexisted, and not always from a specific, in a peaceful way. So in that regard, so I now will suggest that we can at least see artificial intelligence from at least 3 different perspectives, just of course to try to organize our interpretation of the field. So one is of course AI as a scientific domain. So in the sense of fundamental and also applied but fundamental research. And in that regard, if we follow, of course, the formal use of the term, it has now approximately 69 years old. So if we, of course, consider the well-known Dartmouth Summer Research meeting led, among others, by John McCarthy. But of course, it's also important to notice that there pre-exist some important research and even theoretical works. One, of course, by Alan Turing, so which did not use the term artificial intelligence, but for instance, in this research paper, he already refers to the imitation game, which is really important. It's now called actually the Turing test, the field of AI. So the second layer, which I try to organize in a way that is not sometimes melded with the previous one, but sometimes it is that the artificial intelligence as a commercial enterprise. So as a tech development and applied research, and of course this is the field that most of us have contact with. So with the applications, rather with the computational artifacts, both software and hardware. For instance, as you see there, so-called virtual assistants that are now incorporated in several devices of our daily life. The third level or layer, if I may, so it's to understand AI as an anthropomorphic attribute. So this is more specifically the attribute of logical capacity, commonly described as the ability of these computational systems to learn, as for instance in machine learning. So in this perspective, establish a direct link, of course, with the field of logic, and now called Aristotelian logic. That's why I'm using Aristotle's image. So, and in particular with syllogisms in deductive operations. And that's, I bring that because the very recently proved, and I think very important, that will have a great impact. And we can, of course, debate this a little bit later on the upcoming impact of the so-called AI Act at the European level. But I think it will not only be having an impact at the European level, since it limits non-European applications and companies to operate in, or may limits to operate in Europe. So the AI Act, which is a regulation for the use of AI in Europe, also uses that inference capability to distinguish AI systems from other sort of, let's call it, more traditional or simpler software systems. And this is really important because this new and upcoming regulation, one of the main novelties that it brings is to kind of signal the different risk level of AI systems. So it has to do with some sort, with the application of these systems for insensitive areas such as education and other areas, as you can see later. So moving a little bit to what I call the classic prefiguration, it has to do with the imagination and storytelling, not just regarding artificial intelligence, but also what we may call artificial life, which is not a singularity, if you want, or a particularity of modern academic departments of computer science and biotechnology. We can actually find it if I just bring here 3 examples from very classic, even foundational works in European culture. Elite by Homer, Argonautics from Apollonie de Rhodes, and the Metamorphose, in this case, by Ovid, which in all these cases, and other that we can, of course, find, there are already several, I would call it, imaginations or prefigurations of artificial life in this. So we actually, for those of us or those of you who actually want to kind of do this in a reverse way, so trying to study the path and how these imaginations then work and are present actually in previous classical work. So we can actually understand these works or classical mythology as kind of an embryonic form of science fiction, which these prefigurations are always also contemporary of us, so they are not confined to classical antiquity. And they have been already, of course, abundant for many decades, for instance, in media production. So, and I will start with the journalistic or news media narratives. This is actually an extract from the New York Times from 1958, so just 2 years after the foundation of the field itself. And this is actually, so it's a news presenting what is called the perceptron, which is the first, let's call it, electronic mechanisms trying to emulate the functioning of a human synapse. Based on that, trying to use that as the base for information processing. So I'll also use this example, not just to, because if we read the news feeds, we can see, of course, from the, let's call it, from the scientific perspective, I would say very high level and high dreams. So, but also, of course, the translation of that in news media as the electronic brain that can teach itself. So this is not yet possible even today, as it is titled exactly here. So this also, it's really important for, particularly from the field of media studies, to also to study how artificial intelligence has been and it's still actually being portrayed in the news media, because that, of course, generates public perception of science and technology that for sure influences, of course, the political debates also nowadays. So also here the science fiction field, so it's really, these contemporary prefigurations are really, I would say, deeply in depth to artistic creation, not only in literary terms, but also in cinematic works. I just bring, of course, three examples. In all 3 books, for instance, from Isaac Asimov, Philip K. Dick, and Arthur C. Clarke, all these books were also adapted into film, so into the cinematic canonical works. And I will just share with you just one brief minute, in this case from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a work, of course, people know it as, of course, it's directed by Stanley Kubrick, but which is also relevant is that the book is based on Arthur C. Clarke, or partially based. So it's really important to check, and I do stress that the film was produced in 1968, but as you will see in a minute, but it still reiterates several debates that we have nowadays.
Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal?
Affirmative, Dave. I read you.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move.
So this brief, so of course, it's a very brief sequence from the film itself, and for those of you who haven't seen it, so I do really suggest that you see. So it embodied a little bit the prefiguration of conscious, self-conscious, actually in the computational systems. And I actually prepared to help a little bit here with French subtitles, but it's not working. But I think everyone understood not only the English but also the scene itself. So in the sense that all these books and cinematic artifacts or works in this particular relates with the so-called singularity moment, so a projection in time where AI systems will actually develop not only conscious but a higher level of intelligence that will surpass human intelligence, which the field is always constantly since the beginning in this kind of pendulum between dystopia and utopia, in the sense of what I call the Terminator moment, that so AI will kill us all, or AI will allow us to be in life-size vacations because the robots will do everything. So this pendulum and utopia and dystopia is really sometimes really stressed by the media itself and of course by artistic creation. So in this sense, not only I suggest not only AI is deeply rooted in classic mythology, but I think that the field itself develops and establishes technological myths within its own discursive sphere. I bring just this example by Hollenbach, just to get in his work, Mythology, already published in 1957. So just one actually before, or one bit after, sorry, the official founding of the field of AI. Bach already identified the fundamental characteristic of technological myths. And he mentioned that a myth is always a theft of language. And this is particularly, I think, visible in the field of artificial intelligence, for it when you use machine learning. So it's one more anthropomorphizing the language of the field with common human characteristics. And although no specific writings, at least I don't know any specific writings from Bach about artificial intelligence, he actually wrote about another, at the time, technology that was coming from into the industrial complex, I would say, to the daily lives of people, which is plastic. And what I did is, if you translate this or trade the plastic by AI, I think this really suits what is happening right now. So AI has an idea of itself as the infinite transformation. So in this linguistic exercise, we can see actually that this discursive plasticity of the technological myths very clear. So it's here also that the concept of sociotechnical imaginaries gain relevance, particularly in this moving projection of fourth industrial revolution. So
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sure. What is the objective of categorizations? I mean, I see your fragmental presentations at the end, where like what's your objective of this report? Like, what is the central message that you're trying to convey?
If you allow me to so I'm trying to create a broad perspective for the field itself. So in a sense of giving you the different perspective coming from the social sciences, that how until now the social science have been addressing AI in itself, not just limiting itself to use AI tool in research, but to study about AI. So that's called the first segment that I just finished is a little bit coming from the field of some cultural studies and how people from literary studies or film studies have been working about AI. So this, in the second moment, trying to summarize a little bit the work that actually relates with the so-called field of science and technology studies. So in that particular field, the sociotechnical imaginary as so I'm not presenting my research in the sense of I will not be producing a paper, which I may, of course, I will include. I'm trying to give you a broad sense of how social and human science have been studied AI until now. And this is particularly important for even for political science and what is called the science and technology studies. And how this concept has been used to study once more. Now we'll give you actually a real example in study the projection of social world and or if you want to the construction of imagined future. So by the way, the concept that I'm using here comes from Shayla although there are, of course, much more scholars that use the term, but her work particularly has been using the term to particularly connect and to study how the political sphere or the political documents, usually science and technology, plan at the national level. So, for instance, the AI, and I know that France has one, of course, so the national strategy for artificial intelligence, that almost every country developed. So it's really important in this, in a much more kind of sociological and socio-political approach. That's what this line of research has been conducting. So trying to see how the political discourse addressing or regarding to emerging technologies actually paves the floor for the adoption. So in this. This is also relevant because, particularly regarding this fourth industrial revolution, that in particular this concept is particularly developed and proposed by the World Economic Forum. So I'm bringing together policymakers, business leaders, and very important media representatives. So once more to this aimed at its public-private cooperation to shape once more global, regional, and industrial agendas. So this is why, the discourse around the fourth industrial revolution is really important, from my view, to be studied from the perspective of what is called the socio-technical imaginaries. So to give you a real example, so what I did actually a couple of years ago was to study, and now you have the study. So what I did with a colleague, it was for studying what I call the public performance or the discourse of the fourth industrial revolution, as conveyed in this case by the Portuguese national press. So almost for 10 years, so from 2013 to 2020. So and see what were the dominant frames in the fourth industrial revolution coverage by the news media in Portugal. And this is what relevant to see this very striking relation between, of course, in this case, it's really marked contrast between the voices more connected with a business and a financial era, technological that you see on the top, and almost no coverage or perspectives in the news media. For instance, as you can really see in the bottom regarding environmental impact and sustainability. So, so this means that during that period, almost a decade of news coverage of fourth industrial revolution in Portugal, there was almost nothing work towards, let's call it a global environmental perspective. So until now, we see that we saw that AI not only inhabits mythology and culture since their classic foundations, but also that establishes technological myths through public discourse. And as we just saw, that it is really important nowadays to study how these imaginaries surrounding AI and of course other emerging technologies also translate into public policy in national, regional, and even sometimes at the transnational level. So this is a little bit the core of this presentation. So in order also to debate also what has been and why sometimes happen in the study of AI by the social sciences and humanities. So I will start with kind of a metaphor or visual metaphor that which has to do with the notion of rarefaction. So of course, using the term, of course, as the rarefaction of oxygen at higher altitudes that corresponds to the lower density of air. So in what I found is that in this, I will explain the graph a little bit. So what I did is for searching for scientific articles published in Web of Science for collection in the domain of communication. So I'll be very clear on this. So this is the kind of sample that comes from communication studies for the term artificial intelligence. So actually I did this for more than 20 years. So I just erased from the graph the years from 2000 and 2005 because the results were null. So meaning that what I call the rarefaction of the social study of AI by the communication and media study is of course at the bottom and not at the higher. So we actually only see this start in 2017. So in this, there are actually other studies that did similar work trying to understand how the field of communication started explicitly, I must underline. So
why do you think it's a jump? That's your view about the jump.
I will go on that. So for my view, it has to do, of course, with the commercial applications. So it's when people in this case scholars, but not only scholars, because what I'm showing now is not just only researchers. So this graph is not the same as the previous one. So this also this is one of these for Portugal. Also translates the dissertations and theses from the social sciences also about artificial intelligence. Once more, it's not from computer science. And I think, although I'm also more interested, if you want, in what happened before. So why that there was such a delay. But of course, I think this is right because the public awareness is growing around the daily contact with commercial applications of AI, such as, of course, I don't need to mention, so ChatGPT, the Siri, Cortana, etc. So I think that started growing in the last decade.
Technological progress is pretty much continuously progress. So there's no really big jump at the point. My suspicion is that it could be COVID effect. 2018, right? So because of that, we just really start to use more.
But I don't agree that technological is continuous. Nor do I agree that the commercial. I think, for instance, if you look at some of the applications that are AI so even for some generative AI, the concept itself exists for decades by now, but their commercial dissemination was not until recently. That's called the non-specialist managed to work or have a direct contact with applications. So I think that, and more, for Netflix, which of course I do agree that there might be some connection also to the experience of lockdowns, because people have also, for instance, in the recommender systems, for instance, in the entertaining industry media, so Netflix, Spotify, etc. So on-demand platforms. That's actually what we are about to see. So, but this is also, of course, translated in the is translated in the growing works by students themselves. So this translates the dissertations and thesis, so at the master and the PhD level in Portugal, during this period from 2006 to last year. So it's also, although I think it's really important to check the growing, I also like to ask, why did the field of communication studies, I would say, took so long to embrace the study of AI? And of course, I think, but I would like to hear your comments on that. So I think, of course, it's still very much present, and that's why also I think these institutes like here are really, really important in our universities. I think it's still much in place. The notion of kind of the two cultures, so the sometimes non-dialoguing connections between the social and human science and computer science. So, and that sometimes really translates in a very hermetic non-dialoguing departments. So, and this also, of course, translates in the technicality of contemporary AI, which, as you know, relies a lot on the notion of the black box technologies or proprietary black box. So I think that technicality is not particularly, has been any invitation for, let's call, more traditional researchers from the social science. But of course, as you were saying, if we compare the explicit study of AI with the study of platforms in very specific, it's of course for the last 20 years there are a lot of studies, but addressing it from the perspective of platformization and datafication of social life. So there are a lot of work being done in that regard, but not, as I was saying, explicitly. So what I think also is that from at least the social scientists, people have been studying platforms and applications without being completely aware of what is happening actually behind the curtain. So there are a lot, of course, works on this perspective, more from a socio-political and socioeconomic perspective, more from the socio and cultural perspective, and of course from the data or the surveillance capitalism perspective. But all these works and definitions also kind of converge the recognition of the phenomenon that I was just mentioning, so the datafication of social life, meaning the codification of our attitudes and actions, particularly in the platform world, into numerical presentations, and of course their storage in relational databases and their monetization, of course. So the concept of algorithmic capital, which of course is much based on the work of Pierre Bourdieu from the 70s on the different types of capital. So it's now important for us to kind of state that the possession of algorithmic capital is now a form of power. So it's a little bit to give you a little bit more, because I'm not stating that the field of the study of artificial intelligence is just completely new. And there are, of course, already historical foundations for this. Once more, in science and technology studies by a well-known, of course, social scientist, particularly Bruno Latour and Steve Woolger, and that developed this more socio-anthropological work in the production of scientific knowledge, which is what is, I think it's relevant is also that is of course, Steve Woolger, I think it's less known than Bruno Latour, but a couple of years after the publishing of this really kind of seminal book for the science and technology studies, Steve Woolger published this paper already suggesting or establishing the relevance of a need for a sociology of machines, and particularly using the case of sociology and artificial intelligence. So this in the 80s, but this of course gave a little bit rise to a series of works, later works, also from Diana Forsyth, which is one of the first researchers embracing the study of artificial intelligence from a more anthropological perspective, and which of course led to more recent works on this. So when I say anthropological, is really the work of social scientists, in this case anthropologists, within the labs of robotics, and to understand how the systems are conceived and designed, and not just from a technical perspective of computer science and robotics. So also we were touching a little bit this topic a couple of minutes ago. So what we see kind of emerging this algorithmic culture, illustrating how currently our habits have been, for instance, in this case of entertainment and cinema and television, have been, or audiovisual as well, at home, has been changing towards a much kind of algorithmic construction of taste. And what's more, there are, just to give you, for those of you more inclined to study this from the social perspective, so there are a lot of really foundational books of this kind of very recent trend, now called critical studies of algorithms. As we'll see, there are different terms for this line of research. And these three books are really, of course, the authors themselves, with, of course, other books from them after these were published. But this establishing, I think, a rich agenda of research, particularly around term or concepts as algorithmic transparency, opacity, and the notion of bias and discrimination. So until very recent, this was not actually a topic, and I would say that during the last decade, this became an important topic of discussion. Also, and this is part of my work, actually part also of my work in the scope of the fellowship that I received by Fundação Maison de Ciência de l'Homme. So I've been working a little bit on this notion of algocracy and how this, because a lot of focus goes into the use of AI and, of course, management of digital data by private companies, so the platforms themselves. I think less attention has been paid up to the implementation of AI systems in public administration, so by the nation states themselves, in education or social security, etc. So there is a growing use of AI, and I think in most cases without previous public debate, or sometimes even with transparency. So people are not particularly aware of that. The citizens are not always aware that they might be interacting with the autonomous system. So once more, really kind of an emerging line of work towards the sociology of algorithms, or a sociology of algorithmic mediation. So in this case, of course, particularly related with the media studies approach. And I suggest that this study of algorithmic mediation, as we can find it nowadays, of course, in platforms such for music or audiovisual, etc., establishes a connection with what happened, or with some works that were developed in the 70s, in this case in the 90s, about what happened within our domestic life with the dissemination and of television itself. So when the TV entered our homes, what did that change regarding the family dynamics? And I think that is really an important line of work to be assessed in the coming years. So how is AI translated in very different systems getting into our house? So this domestication is really how, in the sense how Roger Silverstone used it, really to domesticate technology itself. So more recently, actually, still even in the beginning of this year, this book was launched. So trying to kind of summarize all these approaches from the social sciences towards a critical theory of AI. And actually, so it's really kind of bringing together different perspectives towards the study of power relation in the political economy of AI. So we'll just see that what I consider to be a kind of late appropriation of AI by communication studies, and also nevertheless that the seminal contribution of science and technology studies gave to the field itself. We also just saw this kind of very proliferation of different terms and approaches to the study, which of course also translates in different methodological approaches. Of course, we can find colleagues studying AI for a much more ethnographic way, and of course other colleagues using, for instance, digital methods from collecting data, and then of course visualization, and not only that, to study the platforms in a kind of more native way. But you can actually see this polyphonic conceptual declination also translated in the methodological approaches. So now we'll just starting approaching the kind of the end in a little bit to give you a little bit some sort of structural perspectives on the importance of renewal of research agendas for social sciences and humanities. So I organized this a little bit, particularly for the field of communication media. So and I organized in these three lines of three layers, if you want. So the AI communication by AI, and communication with AI. So I will of course cover and explain a little bit one of each of the three. So of course this, and I just illustrate this with some sort of relevant work being published with this perspective. So the first is actually what we just saw. So is the growing number of works addressing the mediated construction of AI, being it in the news media or through, of course, the popular culture, such as in cinema or the audiovisual. Although I also like to suggest that it's really becoming important to also see, this is just kind of a small exercise of an extraction by using digital methods, using this case the Google search engine and the Google images, to spread how we actually in the social digital environment actually represent AI. So it is really this study of visual metaphors on how we are communicating is really important also to establish a basis for the social interpretation of the technology itself. Sometimes kind of suggesting something that are not actually real. So in this case, we see all the constant reproduction of this visual metaphor as if a kind of a merging of human brain and electronic chip. But for another one, I could have brought that also. A different example is also the replication of the Sistine Chapel painting with the creation moment of Leonardo da Vinci, and the human and the robot. So it's another visual metaphor that is recurrent in this. So also, I think it's really important also this what I call the generative figuration, meaning the study of how generative AI, or our interaction actually with generative AI, is generating representations of what I ask actually. So I just, for the example, I just prompt, in this case, ChatGPT, to create an image of a city of the future. So, and of course, this is one of the representation system given me. And of course, you can see all sorts of technology there, but you cannot see, for instance, any green spaces or social spaces for, of course, you see the autonomous car, or we assume that there are autonomous cars. So it's really important to try to see what's there and how we are kind of, all these representations and this is why I think it's relevant for the social sciences, it normalizes a vision towards the future. So it normalizes what can, and sometimes it actually hides some risks also from this adoption without more civic discussion of this. So a second axis is also has to do with the, I would say, communication and work through or by AI. And here I think we are as a society facing different challenges. So this has to do with the work, what is called the work under algorithmic management. So you can see, of course, this work in the platforms itself, but more and more, of course, you see it in the, let's call, more traditional industrial work settings or labor settings of workers being controlled to very severe metrics. So I just bring you one. Of course, I could show you, of course, what is happening in the warehouses of Amazon, but that's already a kind of well-known situation, but also in the transportation industry itself. But I choose to bring this example of content moderation, because sometimes we assume, once more, I think that for people that do not have, so for non-specialists or for users or common users, I think an illusion has been created that all that appears and that do not appear in the news feed is the result of computational systems, and it's not. So I think it's really important to bring the notion of what is called the invisible human work, which is the case of content moderators. So that usually what happens is the big corporates kind of externalize this work to other temporary work that, of course, employs in a part-time or a full-time people to assess reported content. And of course, from the studies, this is particularly, I think, important for those of you more inclined to the field of psychology. So what those studies already show with significant relevance is that, or evidence, sorry, is that these content moderators already show signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. So because they are really exposed during a lot of hours a day to really violent work. So you can imagine the type of content. So it's really violent, sometimes images, and it's of course on a random basis. So people never know what it will appear in front of them to assess. And by the way, there are some already examples of decisions in the US, I think, decision in court, of course, also stressing this. So the importance of trying to build some defenses to these workers. And of course, a third line, I think, is particularly important for social sciences as a whole domain, which is, of course, our own interaction with these systems, both on an embodied dimension, so meaning robotics, but also in the non-embodied, meaning software in the sense of apps or chatbots. So there are now, as we all know, incorporated not only in the smartphones, but also in our wrists, in smart watches, in smart TVs, in smart fridges, and so on. So, of course, towards what is called the Internet of Things, so the interconnected devices that share our data and collect data. So it's really, I think, the Internet of Things is really, I think, another layer of important study for the social science. And I've been telling you all this. Of course, I am really, I think it's really important that this line of research be conducted in a really interdisciplinary and even transdisciplinary approach. So this is just a small example of the adoption, in this case, of an embodied, so it's social robotics. I show a little bit this example of an intervention in with senior population, but of course a lot of examples also exist in the case of interventions for junior populations. So, for instance, in pediatric hospitals and so on. So it's really, I think, really important for the social sciences engage with AI in a really inter and transdisciplinary perspective. So I will close with that, and thank you so much once more for. And of course, this is just kind of a overview. I'm really look forward to debate with you and to talk with you, both you here and with people, of course, at home or at least seeing us, following us through Zoom. So thank you so much.
Thank you.